It's about His Grace, Aindra Prabhu. Is that interesting for anybody?
Yeah.
Great. Hare Krishna, Om Jnana Timrandasya Gananchana Shalakaya Chakshurambalitam Yenam. Opportunity to connect with many amazing personalities in this Hare Krishna movement. Srila Prabhupada's society is full of beautiful devotees. But for myself personally, I can say Aindra Prabhu is exceptional. Amongst all the beautiful devotees in this movement, Aindra was definitely one of a kind. It was, I feel, the greatest, certainly at least one of the greatest blessings to have had his association, and one of the most devastating losses, or I think I can just say the most devastating loss of my life, to lose his association. People have some idea who we're talking about, right? Everybody is listening to Aindra Prabhu. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, what is that famous verse? He reasons ill who says that the Vaishnavas die when thou art living in sound. The Vaishnavas die to live, and living they spread the holy name around. What a great verse. Totally applies to Aindra Prabhu. Even though he has left this world, he has left our vision, look at how the transcendental sound he created is still enlivening and inspiring so many devotees. That's the real mark of a Vaishnava, like a real sadhu. Even when the person has gone, still the way he has chanted and glorified the Lord is still enlivening people. We can still hear. He has huge, incredible variety of kirtan that he's left, endless hours. I don't know if we can even listen to them all. We have recordings of his kirtan and so many of his classes and spoken words. And practically we see devotees when they connect to the sounds of Aindra Prabhu, how they're enlivened in Krishna consciousness. Aindra Prabhu grew up in Arlington, Virginia. He was like a hippie, musician kind of person. At a certain point, he got an Ishopanishad. That was his first book. He was in a relationship that was kind of like a marriage, and his wife brought him. She said, I think you're into spiritual stuff. You should check this out. When he read the Ishopanishad, he says, then I understood that I had met my guru. At a certain point, he was associating with the devotees in the Washington, D.C. area. One of the devotees recounts that they were doing Harinam, and Aindra, he saw the Harinam, he followed that Harinam, and at the end, this Mataji, she realized that Aindra had lost his slipper. She said, what happened to your shoe? I lost it while we were doing Harinam. Well, why didn't you go get it? He said, no, if I had gone back to get my shoe, I might have lost you. At one point, he was living in that D.C. temple, and the devotees were going out on Sankirtan for 16 hours a day, which means that they would, there weren't so many books in those years yet in the Hare Krishna movement, so they would go out on the street and they would chant for all day long. He said there was maybe 20 devotees in their temple, and like 19 of them would go out and do Sankirtan, and maybe sell Back to Godhead magazines. And Srila Prabhupada wrote a letter to the temple president at one point and expressed, I am so pleased with your 16-hour Sankirtan days. And that was a great enlivenment to Aindra Prabhu. At another time, Aindra was at the Baltimore temple, and Srila Prabhupada came there, and Aindra said somehow there was a procession. It's a property with a few buildings, and they were walking from one side of the property to the other, as far as I understand. And they were taking Srila Prabhupada, escorting him by kirtan. Aindra said somebody just put the mridanga into him, onto his shoulder, and told him to chant. And he said, he chanted enthusiastically from the heart as best he could. And he said, at that time, Srila Prabhupada turned to him and said the only word that he'd ever spoken directly to him in his manifest presence. That word was, Srila Prabhupada turned to Aindra while he's jubilantly chanting, and he said, Jai. And so Aindra Prabhu said, that Jai had so much meaning for me. That Jai had so much potency. Why did I get a Jai out of Srila Prabhupada? Because I was doing Harinam Sankirtan. And so he said, so that was a great inspiration for me in my life, that, to please Srila Prabhupada, for Srila Prabhupada to, say Jai, we should always do Harinam Sankirtan. Later in New York City, after Srila Prabhupada had left, there had been some difficulty in the yatra. They had an incredible property in a very prime location, but that property was lost, and they were forced to move to a less prime location. Aindra did something phenomenal. You can look up online. He created a traveling temple truck. He had like a box truck that would, be used to transport things, and he created it so that, the box, it kind of opened up. He had all of these gorgeous ornaments that he personally designed, and it would open up, and there would be a temple. He had deities inside, and he and a group of devotees would go out and do kirtan, and they could also distribute a little prasadam. They had like some dioramas and like a book table, and with the truck he could go to different prime locations in the city, open it up, and there was a temple on the street with deities and devotees and chanting and Prabhupada's books, and like that with. It was some incredible endeavor. One of his godbrothers told me, he had a place in the basement of the temple. He worked on that thing tirelessly, and all of his godbrothers said the same thing. They all said to him, Aindra, what are you doing? This is a huge over endeavor. And he said, and after he finished it, it took him months to create all these incredible decorations. And after he finally finished the truck, then all the same godbrothers, they all said the same thing. They said, wow, this is beautiful. Within 1 week, he made it into one of the important newspapers in New York, maybe the New York Post or something like that. You can look it up if you look, on Google Images or something for Aindra's Harinam truck. Later in the mid-'80s, maybe it was 86, he came to India for the Gurpurnima festival. And again, there had been some trouble in New York. There was, Hare Krishna, how do you say? Maybe a lack of purity in some of the leadership, which made it very, very difficult to preach. He was doing 16 hours again, something like that, in that Harinam truck. And of course, when you preach, then there should be a qualified spiritual master that you can preach to people. You should, take shelter here. And if that's in doubt, then it becomes much more difficult to preach. Aindra Prabhu, he shifted to India, and he had an idea that he would make a similar kind of traveling Sankirtan bus and travel around India doing Harinam Sankirtan. When he got to the Krishna Balaram Mandir, he had understood Srila Prabhupada had a very strong desire that he wanted 24-hour kirtan in the Krishna Balaram Mandir. And the devotees had attempted to do that, but somehow it was difficult, and they weren't able to maintain it. Like Kadamba Kanana Maharaj, who was one of the temple presidents in the old days, he said, oh, the difficulty was the night shift. Who could do the night shift? It's a very austere thing to do the night shift. And so one of the devotees that was at the temple, he had a dream where Srila Prabhupada came to him in that dream and said, what has happened to my 24-hour kirtan? And he approached Aindra Prabhu. He said, Aindra, I know that you really appreciate kirtan. You like to do kirtan. Srila Prabhupada has come to me in this dream and is saying, what happened to the 24-hour kirtan? And so he said, maybe you should do it. You should do the 24-hour kirtan. And Aindra felt inspired to do that. Oh, another nice story came to mind. When he was in New York, the devotees were in maybe a different mood in the early 80s, and he wanted to have more devotees come out on Harinam Sankirtan. Somehow they were engaged in other ways. I think they were under financial pressure, and they thought they had to go out and sell different things. And Aindra always wanted to push everybody to go out on Harinam Sankirtan, and he was a little bit in the mood of complaining. Why aren't the devotees doing kirtan? Why aren't they doing Harinam Sankirtan? And one of his godbrothers said to him, Aindra Prabhu, instead of complaining that the devotees aren't coming out with you on Harinam Sankirtan, why don't you do your kirtan in such a way that's attractive, that will inspire them to come out? And Aindra felt that Krishna spoke through that godbrother. Because practically we see, look how he followed that. He did his kirtan in such an attractive way, the whole movement is followed. So in Vrindavan, he started the 24-hour kirtan with considerable effort. My Guru Maharaj told the story. Initially, he would just do like huge amounts of the 24 hours himself. Even to the point, my Guru Maharaj said at one point he met Aindra Prabhu, and Aindra was in complete distress. He was doing, some huge amount of kirtan out of 24 hours, and he had fallen behind in his japa. And he made a comment to my Guru Maharaj one time, I'm 187 rounds behind. I have no taste for the holy name. And he threw his japa mala across the room in complete frustration. So he's just chanting all day, but somehow he felt like that. Aindra Prabhu told me, he said, one aspect of my preaching is that when the who here has been to the Krishna Balaram temple? Okay, many devotees. So it's if you have the experience, the Krishna Balaram Mandir is just as good as any of the best Sankirtan spots in any of the major cities in the world. Just by sitting there and doing kirtan, practically thousands of people are coming through the temple every day. There's so many pilgrims that come through there that just you sit there and you do your kirtan, you'll connect with so many people. So many people will hear Hare Krishna, Sankirtan. So many people are receiving books just there on the Krishna Balaram Mandir property, and so on. And so he said, one of the important things of my preaching is people are taking darshan of the deities and they're hearing the kirtan, and they're very amazed when they turn around after taking darshan and they see that the person that is leading the kirtan is a white man. Because he says, because I tried to adopt some of the Indian style. I can say for myself, when I joined Hare Krishna movement, the temples that we had in New York and New Jersey, there'd be some simple kirtan going, and something was kind of nice about it. Something was inspiring also, but sometimes it's a little primitive, a little bit mechanical. And I remember the first time I entered that Krishna Balaram temple, it was just before Kartik in the late 90s. And I came into the temple room, and Aindra Prabhu was leading the kirtan. It was like maybe mid-morning. And honestly, I don't remember experiencing him or his kirtan like as dramatically as that first time ever again. He had been following Chaturmasya. His beard was grown out, his hair was grown out. He had his unique style of dress, he had his ankle bells on, and it was like his eyes were like on fire. I mean, it was like they were so unbelievably intense, how he was looking at the deities, and the way he sang, not only was it like so artistic and beautiful and stylistic, it was like this, just like this desperate crying for God. And it just hit me at that time. The first time I saw Aindra, I said, oh, now I understand what this kirtan business is. That's what it's supposed to be. Aindra had very, very strong faith in Vrindavan Dham. One time I remember I came to his room. I had just arrived, and he asked me, did you came today? I said, yes, Prabhu. And somehow Aindra had a huge amount of Shakti. It's very difficult to articulate how in his presence was very strong. All the sadhana, all the austerities, all of the chanting, he had incredible Shakti. And so, when did you arrive? And so I said, I came today. And then suddenly I became completely self-conscious. It was like I had traveled on a Thursday, and it was Ekadasi, and I had done everything wrong, and I thought, Aindra's so strict, that he's so into rules, and I kind of apologized, I didn't really plan my travel correctly, Aindra. I shouldn't really have traveled on this day, and it's Ekadasi, and he just looked at me and he said, oh, I would break any rule to come to Vrindavan. Once we were discussing, there were a group of devotees. They were discussing the offenses to the holy Dham, and devotees know the 10 offenses to the holy Dham. It's offense to harm any of the entities there. It's an offense to do business in the Dham. There's different offenses. And after a few devotees spoke, then Aindra gave his realization, his conclusion. He says, actually, the greatest offense to Vrindavan Dham is to leave the Dham after one has attained the Dham. The only way it may not be considered as an offense is if one leaves the Dham with the exclusive purpose to preach the glories of the Dham. Just like you'll see in the example of Srila Prabhupada, he was in Vrindavan, he left Vrindavan, but why did he leave? For his comfort, for his sense gratification? Not at all. Exclusively for the purpose of preaching the glories of Vrindavan. Once a devotee asked Aindra Prabhu, maybe with a little sentimentality, he was a devotee from Delhi. He said, Aindra Prabhu, how can we remember Vrindavan Dham when we are outside of Vrindavan Dham? And so Aindra Prabhu said, yes, there's a very beautiful book by Prabodhananda Saraswati called Vrindavan Mahimamrita. That book is full of so much glorification of Vrindavan. And if you will read that book, you will get so much enlivened, you'll feel so enlivened, and you will remember Vrindavan. And then somehow he paused and he said, wait a second, have you read all of Srila Prabhupada's books yet? And the devotee kind of yeah, well, mostly, Aindra Prabhu, he said, you nonsense! He said, within my first 4 years in this Hare Krishna movement, I read all of Srila Prabhupada's books. That means the whole Bhagavatam, the whole Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Gita, Nectar, Devotion, all of the small books, and all of the Back to Godhead magazines also. What are you doing? What are you wasting your time in this Hare Krishna movement if you haven't read all of Srila Prabhupada's books? There was 1 year I spent with Aindra Prabhu, and I was a young guy, like in my early 20s, and in the news there was a big tension between India and Pakistan, and it was like still, but this time, at that time, the tension had become kind of very prominent, and it was like the top news story every day. It was saying India and Pakistan, 2 nuclear powers on the brink of war, and that was like, pushed it out of the media all the time. And my mother, she contacted me, even another relative also, he said, please come home, please, what about if there's war? And even the American government issued a statement saying all Americans should exit India because the tension is so strong right now. And so I was a little bewildered, and I went and I said, Aindra Prabhu, my relatives are calling me, they're saying, maybe I should leave Vrindavan. I was so happy doing 24-hour kirtan that year with Aindra. It was really ecstatic. And I said, my parents are calling me out. Maybe I should leave. And Aindra's comment was, well, if your friends and family are concerned that you can die, they should be encouraging you to stay in Vrindavan so that you can leave your body in Vrindavan. Some devotees from Delhi, they came to Aindra Prabhu, and Aindra Prabhu, he asked them, he said, are you Prabhus, are you going out and doing Harinam Sankirtan? Yes, Aindra Prabhu. How often do you go out and do Harinam Sankirtan? They say, we go out for maybe 1 hour a week. Aindra said, yes, you can continue doing like that. And if you will continue doing like that, your whole life you will remain a Kanishta Adhikari. Another friend of mine, Aindra was a very staunch renunciate. And so a lot of his preaching and instruction has that kind of mood to it. So a friend of mine, he had joined Hare Krishna movement in Canada, but he was originally from Lebanon. And so his father at some point called him back to Lebanon to work on his business. And some devotees preached to him that he should do that, and he can preach. He could preach there. And actually, still to this day, he's doing a very beautiful service, preaching on a front line where there's not much activity. And so he went to Aindra Prabhu and he said, Aindra Prabhu, you should, please, can you give your blessings? I will move to Lebanon for preaching. And so Aindra kind of thought a second. He said, so what will you do? You will get married? He said, yes, Prabhu. He said, that's nonsense. Why do you want to get married? and my friend said, actually, I had so many reasons in my mind, but at that moment, in the presence of Aindra, I couldn't actually think of any other reason. And so Aindra said, you should forget this, idea, and you can stay here in Vrindavan, and you can chant Hare Krishna, you can do 24 hours kirtan. And so this devotee, he said, Prabhu, but what about my material desires? Aindra said, just do what I did. He said, I did Harinam Sankirtan for 16 hours a day. If you will do that, all of your desires will be taken care of. Okay. a devotee came to Aindra feeling a little bewildered. In Vrindavan, we can understand there may be different gurus, different types of societies of devotees, and sometimes, anyway, devotees may get the idea they need to go here and there to get bhakti. Somebody was thinking, oh, maybe I need to change my guru. Aindra's comment was very strong, very beautiful. He always preached, he said, this ISKCON movement is complete. He said to that person, the problem is not your guru. The problem is the intensity of your bhajans. He said, actually, there are so many ways to keep ourselves engaged in Krishna consciousness. There are so many books to read. There's so many rounds to chant. There's so much kirtan to do. There's so much seva. There's no excuse. Nobody is holding you back from being fully engaged 24 hours a day in Krishna consciousness. The problem is not your guru. The problem is the intensity of your bhajan. Once a devotee came to Aindra Prabhu, a senior devotee. He was concerned about Aindra Prabhu's influence on the youth. And this devotee, he had said, I should start by saying, Aindra's sadhana was something very, very strong. I didn't describe, actually. Aindra had his deity worship, which would take 4 hours a day. Over the years, he collected, somehow more and more deities came to him. Practically, he has thousands of Shilas in his room. And he has other deities, he has great Purnitai deities, Govardhan Shilas, many deities. And so, he would spend his time with 24-hour kirtan, with deity worship. He was always hearing Krishna Katha, hardly sleeping, and especially for the last couple of years, he was chanting 116 rounds of japa every day. Yeah, and the idea behind that was, if you'll do the math, in one Hare Krishna mantra is how many names? 16? 16. And if you multiply that by 108, and then again, if you'll multiply that by 57 or 58, you will get to the number of 100,000. Like we know Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he says in the Chaitanya Bhagavat that he only accepts the offerings of those devotees who are, Lakeshwa? Yeah. And it means those devotees that will chant 100,000 names a day, then if they will offer Bhoga, Krishna will accept. Who says that? So, and the example of our acharyas, like the 6 Goswamis, they were chanting 2 lakhs a day. And Haridas Thakur was chanting 3 lakhs a day. So Aindra Prabhu was chanting 2 lakhs a day. 116 rounds, if you do the math, it's about 200,000 names a day. So Aindra Prabhu was doing like that. And there was a senior devotee, he came to Aindra, concerned how Aindra was influencing the youth. And this devotee, he said, Aindra Prabhu, I've spoken to some of these kids, and they're so fired up to sing and play mridanga and to do kirtan. And I asked them, what about your sadhana? Are you chanting japa? Oh, it's not so important. We are following Aindra Prabhu. We just do kirtan. Aindra says kirtan, we just like kirtan. And so the senior devotee said, so these kids are saying like that. What do you have to say about this, Aindra Prabhu? Aindra said, oh, you know me much better than that. I never preach such nonsense. I'm chanting 116 rounds of japa every day. If someone wants to say that they're following me, at least they can chant their 16 rounds every day. Haribo. I don't know, should I go on? Are these interesting stories?
Yes.
One time, Aindra Prabhu, he was making some recording, and you know, technology has evolved over time. At that time, maybe about 15, 18 years ago, people were using mini disc recorders. Anyone remember that? Anyway, they're little boxes, and they have like a little disc in them, and that was like very advanced recording technology in those years. Not everybody had the cell phone and stuff. And so Aindra Prabhu was like a real perfectionist making his recording, and he pushed himself so hard. He just can serve day and night. If he's like fixed on some project, like that truck in New York, he would just serve day and night making that truck. So same, when he's making his albums, making his recordings, he'll just do his thing throughout the night, forgetting sleep. And somehow this mini disc machine was giving a problem, and it wasn't working. And you know, but that's not going to slow down Aindra. You know, he's going to work on it and fix it and do whatever he can. And he couldn't fix it, and he couldn't fix it, and it wasn't working. And so he has his big wooden Nittai Sachi Suda deities. Have anybody ever seen those deities? They're not quite life size, but they're big. And so at a certain point, Aindra Prabhu, he took this mini disc recording machine, and he just, in total frustration, he said to his Nittai Sachi Sutta deities, "I'm trying to make these recordings for your pleasure, but you know, this damn machine doesn't work. And so, you know, if you want it to work, you know, you fix it." And so he put it in the hand of his Nittai deity, and he left it there for a little while. And then later he took it back, and it worked. A friend of mine, I had a friend who was a brahmachari book distributor. We were the same age, and he was living in Vrindavan. He would distribute books outside of Srila Prabhupada's Samadhi. I remember him telling me once, it was a great comment, he said, "I know that I could stay brahmachari if I could just sit in Aindra Prabhu's kirtan every day." You know, it had so much shakti, it would give him the strength. And he was kind of like a mental guy, if you can understand, like indecisive. I'm not sure. So now I'm a brahmachari and I'm distributing. Maybe I should go back to school and, you know, work on my career. And he wasn't sure. Maybe it's better to be. It's like a typical kind of unfixed, unsteady mentality in devotional service. Maybe better to pursue family life and get a job, maybe better to be a renunciate, I don't know. And so he came with Aindra Prabhu to that mood. He said, "Aindra Prabhu, I'm not really sure what to do. You know, maybe I should stay doing this, maybe I should do a different service, maybe I should go to school. You know, I'm not sure. And Aindra Prabhu said, "I know what you should do." He said, "Really? What should I do?" Aindra said, "You should make a flower garden for Radha Shama Sundar." And he said, "What?" He said, I don't know anything about gardening. I've never planted any flowers before. And he said, "That's all right. You can figure that out." He said, "Radha Shama Sundar, they need a flower garden." He said, "The mistake that people make is they think that devotional service is about what they want to do." A friend of mine, he visited Vrindavan. He was there for some time, and then he had to leave. He went to Aindra Prabhu, "Hare Krishna Prabhu, I have to leave Vrindavan." He said, "Oh, you have to leave Vrindavan." He said, "Have you cried? Have you cried that you have to leave?" My friend said, "No." Aindra said, "Then you were never here." Ah, at one point I was on Aindra Prabhu's kirtan party. I had finished my university study, and I don't know what the system is here, but in America, to go to university, oftentimes people have to take loans to afford the tuition fees. And so I'd had a fair amount of loans outstanding, and they give you a little bit of a grace period after you finish university, where you don't have to pay them back right away. And so I took that grace period and I stayed with Aindra Prabhu. But Aindra was preaching to me, you should stay, and this. He said, how can you leave? This is your home. You belong here now. So I said, no, I have these debts. I have to pay my university tuition debts. And he said, well, what would happen if you just didn't pay them? And I said, well, I guess it would just ruin my credit. He said, what does that mean? And I said, well, I guess it means, I could never have a credit card, or I could never have a car, or I could never have a house. And so Aindra thought for a moment. He said, that doesn't sound that bad. He said, I've never had a house. I've never had a car. I've never had a credit card. In the Krishna Balaram temple, it's kind of it's a big project. It's not so easy. There have been many different temple presidents throughout the years. I think somebody counted, there have been more than 20, or even 25 or something like that in the 40 years of that temple. And Aindra was a very powerful person, very influential. People, followed him and they liked him. And for some managers, that's very favorable. And for some managers, it's not so favorable. Because, if you want to be the boss and here's somebody else who has all this influence, you may feel that there's a conflict. And so Aindra, he continued serving throughout all these changes of managers. And some of them were very favorable to him, and some of them were not. And at one point in particular, he was, I don't want to say anything bad. He was suffering under the management. He felt mistreated. He felt, that they wanted to push him out. He felt, they wanted to over-control him. And he felt like a lot of pressure on him, and he was struggling, and he was telling me about that. And he said, sometimes I think, maybe I should just, move out somewhere and stay in some other place, stay in another ashram. He said, but I won't do that, because I have made a vow that I will stay in the society of my spiritual master for at least 50 years, so that when it comes time that I have to face Srila Prabhupada again, I can say to him, well, Srila Prabhupada, at least I managed to stay in your society for 50 years. A friend of mine admitted to Aindra. He said how he was struggling in Krishna consciousness, especially that he could not follow brahmacharya. And he said Aindra chastised him like he never got chastised in his life. Aindra was so heavy preaching to him. He said, we are worshiping Krishna, we're worshiping Radha and Krishna. This is a very, very intimate type of worship. And if on the material platform we're being careless, not following the standards of brahmacharya, then how can we do this type of worship? We'll never be able to do this type of worship. And anyway, I can't imitate, and I wasn't there, But this devotee said Aindra was so heavy with him that my friend, he was crying. And even Aindra chastised him for that. He said, "You nonsense." He said, "Tears are for, you should cry for Krishna." He said, "You're just crying for your own sense gratification." And so he was very, very strong on this person, like mercilessly chastising him like he'd never been chastised. And he said afterwards, he felt so completely dejected and broken, and maybe Aindra doesn't like me, and how can I ever speak to Aindra Prabhu again? He felt devastated, and he kind of stood in the hall down from Aindra Prabhu's room, just completely dejected. And finally, at one point, Aindra came out. "Oh, you rascal, you're still here." And then. But Aindra Prabhu took pity on that devotee, and he kind of put his hand on his shoulder and he said, "Is there anybody else in your life that you have that can speak to you the way that I've spoken to you?" And that devotee said, "No, Prabhu." He said, "Yes, so therefore I have to speak to you like this. If I don't speak to you like this, then who else will speak to you like this?" I also had experience. Aindra came into the ashram, and one day one of the young boys, actually it's amazing. I was thinking today while I was thinking of these stories, in those last years, there was a number of young devotees that had come from devotee families. And some of them have just blossomed so beautifully. It's just such great devotees. But, they kind of came like pretty rough around the edges, not trained, sometimes spaced out in Maya. And Aindra accepted them. I mean, one example, and I don't mean like I don't think it would be bad to say, but like Amal Harinam, he's a great example. As a kid, he was just like a kid, and he was in Maya, and the mercy he got from Aindra, and how Aindra Prabhu set him straight. And I remember someone coming to Aindra's room and complaining and saying, "Oh, the kids are doing this, and they're out eating, whatever, they're out eating street food, and they're at someone's house watching TV or whatever," and I remember Aindra saying, well, they're doing better than they were before. And there's other examples. I mean, Amal is one, but there's others. People, even since Aindra left, but they were touched by Aindra, how they blossomed into such nice devotees. And so there was one time where he came into one of the rooms of the ashram, and he just started blasting the devotees. Oh, now I remember what it was. It was about wearing kopans. Hare Krishna. But I won't make too many details about this discussion, but Aindra was saying, Vrindavan Vas means sadhu jivan. It means living like a sadhu. And sadhu jivan means kopan. The 6 Goswamis wore kopans. Wow, so many other good quotes. I just feel it's not appropriate to repeat them all. But he was. Here's a strong comment, and the ladies shouldn't mind because it is not against them. He said like this. He said he's preaching to young men, and young men, it's good to give a slap, to be strong with them. Otherwise, how will they be trained? And so what he said to them, because he's preaching to them that at least, if later you will get married, maybe he doesn't recommend, but Haribol. But now you're in Brahmachari ashram, and now you should learn to follow the standards. So he preached like this. He said, it's time to stand up on your own 2 feet and walk this world alone as a man, without all of the coddling. Did everyone know the meaning of the word coddling? Yeah. It means like to baby or to... He said, it's time to walk this world alone as a man, without all of the coddling and so-called support of a woman. He said, these days, first they're coddled by their mothers, and they're coddled by their sisters, and they're practically handed straight off to be coddled by their girlfriends and their wives or whatever, and they never become men. So anyway, again, actually, in the room, Aindra had made these bunk beds. He like personally made them, and the bunk beds had these kind of chetais on them because it's a 24-hour kirtan, and so different devotees, because of the schedule, it means devotees are like doing kirtan all through the night. It's like it's an austere thing to do. And so devotees, it's understood. If you're doing that service, devotees may need to take rest at any time of the day, to facilitate being able to do that service. So the way that Aindra set it up, it was kind of like a, imagine this kind of like, how does it called? Yeah, it's like a curtain, like these, chetai kind of wooden shades that you could kind of lower onto your bunk. So Aindra came in the room that day when he said what I just repeated, and he kind of immediately dug into one of these young kids. He said, I won't say the name, but like so and so, you have a girlfriend, And as soon as he said that, I like put the chetai like down like all the way. It was like about to get really heavy. And so he preached, so much. He was so heavy. I mean, Aindra's sadhu quality was that when it was time to preach, nobody was heavier. He was like fire. And then, but the other thing I learned from him and I appreciated, the next day, I said, hey, I was in Aindra's room. Hey, Aindra Prabhu, after you spoke to the boys like that yesterday, a few of them started wearing kopins. And how's Aindra going to react to that? He can be upset, he can be annoyed, or why, of course. Or, he would like just so sweet. He was like, oh really? That's great. Like completely innocent. There was one of the ladies. I'm kind of off my notes. Things are coming to mind. Is it still interesting?
Yes.
Please stop me. I don't know. There was one lady. She had a child, but she had unfortunately been divorced, and even she tried to find another husband, and it didn't happen, and it was devastating. And this poor lady, she's older, she has a child, and so I had to preach to her. Okay, now you forget all of this nonsense, and now just you dedicate yourself to worshiping Krishna. And she said, oh, but Aindra Prabhu, I don't want to be alone. I need somebody to be with, and just to keep me company and to embrace sometimes. And so I just comment, just like, he said, can't you get some DVDs? Another time, he said to me, he said, actually, for me, brahmacharya, it is just a question of chastity. And he said, very interesting comment. But don't misunderstand, but wow, what an interesting comment. He said, everybody has the desire for kisses and embraces. It's natural. Everybody has that desire. He says, but just like in religious society or varnashram society, he said, it is only appropriate for a married couple that they will express that desire to the person that they're married to. If they will express that desire within the context of that relationship, no harm. But if they will express those desires outside of that marriage relationship, then that is immoral, that is a disturbance to society, that is not appreciated, not accepted, not allowed. Is that clear? Only within the context of a marriage relationship can someone express those desires, natural desires everybody has, for kisses and embraces, not outside. He said, that's chastity. He said, so for me, brahmacharya is the same thing. It's just a question of chastity. I am in a relationship with Krishna, and I will only express those desires within the context of that relationship. Nowhere else. He said, I remember he's saying things like, if after coming to Krishna consciousness, well, he said, if after coming to Krishna consciousness one gets married, it means one has simply not understood the philosophy. He also said, if after coming to Krishna consciousness, one will allow anybody else besides Krishna to touch their body for the purpose of sense gratification, it means they have not understood the philosophy. He said like that also. Anyway, strong comments. Once I was in a car with Aindra Prabhu, and we needed a ride somewhere to a program, and someone just turned on their CD player or something, and one of the lectures of Srila Prabhupada came on, and it would play for less than a minute, just a few sentences. Prabhupada spoke just a few sentences. And Aindra said immediately, oh, I love this lecture. This is the one where Prabhupada says this, and Prabhupada says this, and Prabhupada says this. Just playing some random lecture Aindra had heard so thoroughly from Srila Prabhupada that he knew what was going to be said in that lecture. Even my friend had done the night shift for some lengthy period of time. And he would walk by Aindra's room every night at 1 a.m. He said every night he heard Srila Prabhupada's lectures being played in Aindra's room at that hour. Anyway, just a few kind of lighter ones about kirtan. Aindra said to me once, he was very particular when he's doing his kirtan that the mridanga be in tune, and that like what Pundarik is doing now, that the deep side, it should have a low bassy sound. If it's too high, then he didn't appreciate. He said to me once, he said, do you know what it means when somebody plays a mridanga that's out of tune? I said, no, Prabhu, what does it mean? It means that they have no bhav. There were a couple of times Pundarik has bhav because he's fixing it. Right. But there were a few times, there was like before Mangalarti, there's kirtan, or sometime in the night, it's in the middle of the night, and I'm in the kirtan. There's only like 2 or 3 of us, and I was playing mridanga, and it happened a couple of times. Aindra just came in out of nowhere. In the dark night of the temple, Aindra just comes through, and everybody kind of back straight. Okay, better look like you're working hard on your custody. And I remember one time Aindra, he just came straight to me with this look on his face. He said, "What's wrong with you? Can't you hear that?" And then I understood he was like annoyed that my mridanga was out of tune. Another time, just in the ashram, that 24-hour kirtan is like a considerable amount of work. And it's anyway, at least for me, I'm not a qualified person. Just the 6 hours a day, it was like, afterwards, sometimes you kind of just want to relax. And so I was in my room, and there was a mridanga, and I was just kind of playing the mridanga. And this is not in the temple room, we're not doing a formal kirtan, I was just practicing a mridanga. And he just came, and he's like, why are you playing it like that? It's completely out of tune. Oh, no, I was just messing around, Prabhu. I don't care. You should never play the mridanga when it sounds like that. You have to put it in tune first. Or another time, again, I think like in the evening time, the shift had just ended, and I was in the room and I was playing a harmonium, and I was playing it kind of like a European style with chords. When like devotees play it just with chords. And again, Aindra just burst into the room. He said, don't ever play the harmonium like that. I don't ever want to hear you play the harmonium like that. I said, no, I was just joking around, Prabhu. It's not being serious. I don't care. I don't ever want to hear you play. Don't ever let me hear you play the harmonium like that. He said, when you play the harmonium like that, it reminds me of some kind of churchianity where like Christians are coming to convert the Hindus in India. Once he told me, he said sometimes people complain that the melodies on my albums are based on like Hindi movie tunes.
Yeah.
Right? He says people say, oh, but this is this song or this is that song. Aindra doesn't have that reference because he doesn't know those songs. He probably heard from some, Bengali Kirtaniya that maybe they took that song and made it into a Hare Krishna melody. But for Aindra, he doesn't know those movie tunes. But he said, so sometimes people complain, why are you singing tunes from the movies? So Aindra said, but I say, those rascals stole those melodies for their sense gratification, and I'm stealing them back for the pleasure of Krishna. We should stop. Okay, we should get some feedback. Okay, just one more. Just, huh?
Can you tell Aindra Prabhu's comment on Trinada Peace Vinician numbers?
Yeah, just one more. Just that last year in 2010, my friend and I, we left Vrindavan just a few weeks before he passed away. And I guess we had an early morning flight or whatever. We had to leave at like 10 or 11 p.m. And we had just spent a very, very wonderful period with Aindra. We were doing kirtan with him every day for months, and we were on the party. And yeah, that was the last day that I saw Aindra Prabhu. And before we left, we knocked on his door, and we said, Aindra Prabhu, we just really wanted to thank you. We have to go. And Aindra, he came out of his room, and it's very difficult actually to communicate like the whole experience of being around Aindra, but he with all of his like intensity and his sharp words, at that time, what I remember was he was like, his words were like as heavy and sharp as they could be, but like he was in such a sweet, like loving mood. I felt like this is like my dad. Like he was so in such a beautiful, like joyful, sweet mood. And the way he preached to us then was he basically talked about the verse from Shikshastika, Trinada Pisunichena. And his comment was, or at least one of the comments that I remember, he probably spoke for like half an hour, but he said, what was it? He said, just, speaking like in a self-depreciating way, or being very polite, and speaking like very soft and sweet, and I'm very fallen, and how can I serve you? This kind of like dealing, it is like the external aspect of humility. It is somewhat superficial. He says the real symptom of humility is to take complete shelter of the holy name of Krishna and to chant Kirtaniya Sadahari, to chant without interruption. Did I get it right? Something like that. Just one more thing. We had in the spring of 2009, I did an interview with Aindra Prabhu. The idea was it was going to be featured in a book, but his untimely passing really derailed that book. But I went to Aindra Prabhu and I asked him if I could interview him and ask him questions about kirtan. And Aindra was like a very unpredictable person. Very like you can't necessarily anticipate what he's going to say. And I actually, honestly, I thought he could be very dismissive and just like, say something to kind of send me away. But he didn't at all. He took it really seriously. He sat with me 2 different nights. We stayed, staying up late into the night, doing like 3-4 hour sessions both nights. And so we had an interview. It's been published online. You can find it in different places. One place you can find it, if you go to my Facebook page, my name is Akinchana Krishnadas. You can find it in the notes. We published the interview there. He tells all kinds of beautiful realizations about kirtan. And that interview, we showed it to Mother Yamuna, who has now also left the world. But the famous Prabhupada disciple Mother Yamuna, who sings the Govindam prayers, she's famous as a cook, she made that big cookbook. Mother Yamuna is also, I had some of her association, absolutely exceptional devotee. I mean, such an incredible, beautiful personality, very, very advanced in Krishna consciousness. Someone sent her that interview, and after reading that interview, which was full of all kinds of, Aindra's preaching and philosophy and his discussions about kirtan, Mother Yamuna, she was the first, her husband, Guru Das, was the first temple president of the Krishna Balaram Mandir at the time when they were constructing the temple. And Mother Yamuna, she read that interview, she said, I never really associated with Aindra Prabhu, and I had heard many things from different people about him. And she said, when Srila Prabhupada established the Krishna Balaram Mandir, he really, really wanted this 24-hour kirtan. It was a very difficult thing to do, and practically you can understand. Now, if you go to the Krishna Balaram temple, that kirtan is like the life and soul of the temple. It's one of the features that makes it one of the most happening temples in the world, in Vrindavan and in the whole world. It's just like, and Mother Yamuna said, at that time, in those early years when the temple had just opened, she said, I prayed and I prayed and I prayed to Radha Shyam Sundar, please send somebody that can do this 24-hour kirtan. And she said, when she read all of Aindra Prabhu's realizations, she said, now I can appreciate what a beautiful devotee they sent to establish that 24-hour kirtan. Aindra Prabhu.